Video games are the ultimate entertainment medium. Nothing else has the power to so effectively whisk someone away to an entirely different place. Movies and TV offer audiences glimpses into other worlds, but they remain outsiders, trapped on the viewer's side of a one-way mirror. You get to observe. You don't get to affect any change. This ability to affect change is the most interesting part of gaming. The player is given all the power. Without them, nothing moves forward. You become the driving force of everything in the digital world. But besides sending NPCs into existential crises, what does it mean to have that level of power? How do games handle power? So first, we need to establish the difference between power and agency. While the two are closely related, for the purposes of this video, they're going to have slightly different definitions. So for us, power is going to be defined as the ability to do whatever you want. Basically, how I affect moment-to-moment events. Agency is going to be defined as the ability to affect change in the world. Do my moment-to-moment decisions affect the world at large? And every game has both, even if they don't seem to at first glance. The distinguishing factor is the emphasis of the developer. Not every game emphasizes both elements, because not every game needs to. For example, the game Journey limits both a player's power and agency, yet it has stuck with me as one of gaming's most impactful experiences since it was released. Games don't necessarily need to give players a lot of power or agency to be impactful. That's not the point of this video. Rather, the point is the relationship between the two, and how that relationship changes the way we play games and perceive their worlds. Hitman's World of Assassination is a funhouse mirror of our own world. While largely grounded and serious, the series is famous for letting things get goofy. Which, by the way, I absolutely adore. I mean, look at this. But despite its more ridiculous or lighthearted elements, it is ultimately a world very closely related to our own. After all, the various missions take place in real-world locations. Many of the targets feel palpably present, their influence on their surroundings mimicking real-world power players. And just like the real world, all it takes is a well-placed bullet or a stealthily administered poison to send someone to the afterlife. The titular Hitman, Agent 47, was created to be the most deadly man on the planet. He has extensive skills in a variety of disciplines that aid him in his fieldwork. He's a master of every style of firearm imaginable, and he has an arsenal of custom-made gadgets large enough to make James Bond jealous. Add to that his impeccable improvisational skills, and you've got a recipe for a man who can use anything to end anyone. And the cherry on top, he's a social chameleon who seamlessly blends in with whatever crowd is presented to him, whether that be Italian priests, fashion icons, or bingo enthusiasts, I guess? Look, I already said the game is goofy. Long story short, regardless of the circumstances, 47 is going to get his target. It's never a question of if, but of when. He's the single most deadly individual in the world. Once his sights are set, there's no one who can evade him. He is an unstoppable force in the business of overcoming immovable objects. These highly honed skills create a perfect recipe for players to explore and interact with the world of Hitman. Each level is massive, filled to bursting with secrets, tools, movement routes, weapons of opportunity, disguises, and so much more. Hitman gives players a lot of power. If you can dream up a method to take down a target, chances are that you can execute it, no pun intended. Each level has a massive list of objectives, whose purpose is to open the player's mind to creative solutions to the various micro-problems of the level. For example, this path in Hitman 2's Sapienza level is normally inaccessible. Armed thugs aren't just going to allow a strange bald man to wander into their boss's mansion. But if you stick around, you might catch a glimpse of this exchange.
You need to get down here now! You'll be late for your first day of work!
Relax, it's all good. Just gotta put some pants on.
Hey! Talk nice to your sister. Look, I got you this job. So just do as I say, or Chef Marcello will be angry at both of us.
Oh, please. It's like you want to wait on that weirdo Caruso for the rest of your life? Come on, you gotta think big.
Armed with knowledge of how to get close to one of your targets, you can ruin this guy's first day on the job and use this status as the unknown new guy to your advantage. From there, you have an access route to the aforementioned mansion. The micro problem of getting past that guarded door is now solved. That's only one method, too. Hitman gives a staggering amount of power to the player by giving them a huge sandbox to play in, with a massive amount of toys and the freedom to explore how those things can interact with one another. It's quite frankly a great example of the power afforded to players in games. But does Hitman provide us any agency? Not really. The choices the player makes when it comes to the assassination of the targets don't really change much about the world. If you walk in guns blazing and murder a town full of people, you might get a bad score, but the story continues without a hitch. There are no headlines that expose the secret organization that Agent 47 works for, nor do the other targets beef up their security in the face of a potential threat on their lives. Things simply continue as they were. A target dying in an unfortunate accident is treated the same as a public execution. The player doesn't really get to affect the world. In truth, they don't even really get to affect the rest of the level. I'm probably forgetting some, but every level has multiple targets, and for the most part, the other targets don't react to one of them being unalived, save for a few exceptions. This dynamic serves the player really well, as they can plan around their targets' routines rather than have to guess at their reactions, lending to the previously mentioned level of power afforded to players. But it can make Agent 47's actions feel really inconsequential. If no one cares how sloppily a job gets done, why should I? From a narrative perspective, nothing I do has any bearing on the rest of the story, so long as my targets die. Well, that's not the point of the Hitman trilogy, and I would argue that no one who plays these games actually cares about it that much. It can turn certain players off from the experience. Power and agency don't intersect much within the context of Hitman, and that's not a bad thing. But it did make me think, what are some games that have the power-agency dynamic interact in interesting ways, either reflected through gameplay or narrative? Hotline Miami is a game about nihilistic, gratuitous violence. The narrative elements only serve to provide the player new venues at which to brutalize people. It's another game that gives the player a great deal of power. You're simply dropped off to a level and told to get busy. Requiring such a high level of improvisation is naturally going to lend itself to player empowerment. After all, you can't tell players to just figure it out without giving them significant autonomy. Within the context of its objectives, Hotline Miami excels at moment-to-moment player choice. Any object you can interact with can be used as a weapon, and is thus useful in maximizing the player's level of power, at least somewhat. When it comes to the player's agency, though, they essentially have none. For those of you who have played the game before, ask yourself, what was the plot of Hotline Miami? For those of you who haven't played it, here's the opening sequence. After a tutorial, you wake up and speak to these people wearing animal masks who speak cryptically about knowing who you are and the horrible things you've done. Then you flash back to your apartment where you receive a phone call. And after the call, you show up at a metro station and lay waste to the people unfortunate enough to be there. While the game definitely has story points after this, they're trivial additions at best. Players have no real agency. They hardly have any context as to why they're doing anything. What it boils down to is this. Players don't need the agency. They just need new and interesting scenarios in which to murder people. And Hotline Miami plays on that point beautifully. The game goes on to question the player themselves. Despite not changing the world in the slightest, why do you keep playing? The answer is as simple as it is haunting. Violently killing people is fun. In an indie game that lasts a few hours, Hotline Miami manages to empower players, remove their agency, then ask them to deeply introspect about their attraction to violence. The very act of continually playing Hotline Miami is to acknowledge that somewhere deep down, you love inflicting mindless violence, so long as it's fun. The game's mix of power and agency, along with some of its narrative elements, is able to uniquely question the player. This kind of thing wouldn't be possible in a medium where the audience isn't also the driving force. By giving the player a lot of meaningful power, but zero agency, the game is able to strike this unique narrative chord. Very few things manage to execute this well. Having a reduced amount of agency usually works to the detriment of games. Personally, I like to think the choices I make during gameplay amount to something. It's the reason The Walking Dead from Telltale works so well. It's a game all about making choices. In fact, Making choices and dialogue is primarily how the player interacts with it. Upon a second playthrough though, it's really easy to see that most of the choices you make don't really amount to much. The power of those choices is relatively little, as they don't typically affect moment-to-moment decisions. But every choice is dripping with agency. Seeing that message in the top corner, "So-and-so will remember that," is both exhilarating and terrifying. If the power of your choice doesn't matter, the agency of it certainly does. Every choice across the saga feels like it can potentially have long-lasting implications. The interesting part of the game isn't the power afforded to the player, but the agency they have in developing how the story unfolds. Hotline Miami and The Walking Dead essentially tackle the power-agency dynamic in opposite ways. The former gives you power, but no agency. The latter gives you basically no power, but a high level of agency. But is there a game that succeeds even when explicitly giving you no power while promising you a high level of agency? Dark Souls 2 is the much maligned sequel to one of the most influential games of all time. It's certainly been the most influential of the last decade. Though it's not as well loved as its predecessor or its sequel, it was my introduction to the world of Dark Souls, and I loved every second of it. The world of Drang Lake and its surroundings is dismal and oppressive. Hope is seldom found. Drang Lake itself is where people come as a last resort, all their other options expended.
I am Solden. And like you, I lost everything. And now I'm here. You probably heard that it was possible to break the curse here. Well, that's not true at all. There's nothing here for you, me, or anybody.
In this world, people are truly powerless, and you as a player feel that same pressure. You have very little control over what's happening at any given moment. Your options in interacting with the world are super limited. You can change your weapons and armor, you can experiment with new spells, but that's kinda it. You aren't able to do much in terms of meaningfully interacting with the world. The most power you have as a player is to continue playing in the face of mounting adversity. Dark Souls 2 isn't necessarily a malicious game, but it's one that seems to revel in your powerlessness. It knows that behind the next fog wall is a boss that is almost certainly too powerful to overcome. You can't go where you want and do what you want. True, the game has multiple paths through its world, but they're predetermined. The developers set them in place, and you are confined to following them purely as intended. There are no creative solutions to its problems. You will go where it leads, and you will fight with its strict rules until you are either victorious or die a bloody death. It's bleak. Normally, keeping a player so powerless would hurt a game's overall experience. Constantly putting off the reward with a vague promise of, "Don't worry, it's coming," is a losing proposition. But Dark Souls 2 actually excels at this. My favorite hub area in all the Souls-like games is Majula. There's just something about it that feels warm and welcoming and safe. The view is incredible, the music is soothing and inviting, the sounds of the sea crashing against the cliff face ooze peacefulness. It's a place of serenity in a world that is desolate. As you progress, the once abandoned town begins to teem with life. Before you know it, you've built up a village of friends. And the strangest thing happens. Suddenly, the world becomes hopeful. While, yes, you are nearly powerless, there's a real sense of agency. Your struggle against adversity isn't for nothing. You're gathering allies and stockpiling hope in a kingdom that has gone without it for time untold. Though you can't save everyone, you did manage to make a difference for a small group of people, and that means something. There's something to be said for a game that is able to give your powerlessness so much agency. Traversing Dark Souls 2's world made me feel as if I was making a difference, even if it was never really reflected in gameplay. The fact that you continue to play in the face of repeated failure, just for a chance to change the world, is the essence of the agency you are given as a player. The decision it presents you at its climax, the choice to link the flame or let it burn out, is a heavy one. The fate of the world rests with you. Your previous powerlessness suddenly flips. Your absence of power has morphed into the ultimate agency. I think there are very few games that execute this dynamic well, primarily because it's hard for players to find satisfaction in it. While it works for Dark Souls, it would hamper a lot of other games. It's generally best practice to give players a reasonable amount of both power and agency. However, there is one game that dares to give players maximum power and agency, and it's probably the one I'm most excited to talk about. Dunwall is a city in turmoil. What was once the crown jewel of an empire is now beset by traitors, assassins, and an incurable rat plague. It is this very city where Corvo Attano is framed for the murder of his empress and his love. He watches her die. He sees her daughter stolen away, and he sees the men responsible attempt to pin it on him. Dishonored is a tale of revenge and justice. However, what those two things mean are totally up to the player's interpretation. Much like Hitman's, Dishonored's levels are large sandboxes, with secrets and power-ups and quests all their own. There are multiple paths to accomplishing any mission. Solutions are only limited by the player's imagination. It is the quintessential go anywhere, do anything stealth game. The player holds ultimate power. The myriad powers allow you to build a playstyle that suits your own needs. You can teleport across impossible distances, leap higher than the greatest athletes, possess animals, and even stop time. That is the power afforded to the player. No one can do the things you can do. Even near the end of the game, when you face an assassin with similar powers, there's never a doubt in your mind. You can take him with ease. He can't do the things you can do. So the player can do whatever they want, whenever they want, with no one able to really stop them. But that power comes with consequences. The things you do with that power bleed directly into your agency. Dishonored operates with a morality system that judges your actions as chaos. If you murder everything in sight on your quest for vengeance, you'll be rewarded with a high chaos rating. All the extra bodies lying around mean the spread of the rat plague. Areas become more difficult to navigate as ravenous rat swarms fearlessly strip men's flesh from their bones. Weepers, the game's zombie-like infected, hobble through the streets unimpeded as the city guard stretches ever thinner. Dunwall becomes wrapped in darkness. It's heavy in the air. You see the consequences of your actions. The city is in your care. But what does that mean for its fate? Like I said before, the game ultimately asks you to take revenge on those who wronged you, but it allows you to decide what exactly necessitates revenge. It implicitly asks, do the ends justify the means? One of my favorite side stories in the game involves a criminal named Slackjaw. His gang is responsible for selling elixir, the wonder potion meant to cure and prevent the plague. The problem is, his product is illegitimate. See, Slackjaw's lackeys are instructed to water down the more widely used, but egregiously expensive elixir created by the government. They then sell it at a fraction of the price. The practice is unethical, to say the least, but it generates money, and that's what the Bottle Street gang cares about. That same gang is harassing an elderly woman by the name of Granny Rags, and if the player helps her deal with the problem, she rewards you with a rune, which can increase your existing abilities or allow you to gain a new one. If you help her, she promises a second one as well, but only if Corvo poisons the gang's elixir still with rat plague.
I hope you like the little gift I got for you. It's the least I could do for turning those louts away. I can't bear these Bottle Street children. Ruffians, every last one of them. Rotten apples. And that Slackjaw is the worst lot. You know what I just thought of? You could do something else for me. Another little favor. And I'd give you another present. Another lovely rune carved from the bones of a dead whale. Do you remember my doctor, dear? Dr. Galvani? Now there was a clever man. He's got all sorts of nasty rat guts and disease in his laboratory. Wouldn't it be a shame if some of that mess found its way into the Bottle Street gang's elixir still? That'd teach him.
The choice to do this is a microcosm of Dishonored's greatest hook. Completing this task gives you guaranteed increase in power, but it also puts innocent lives in danger. Choosing to poison the elixir would betray the hope contained within every vial. But it's worth it if it makes you more powerful to do your job, right? While the production of the elixir itself is illegal, the people that are buying it are the real victims. I mean, these people are already struggling to get by as is. That's why they've turned to Slackjaw. Can you really bear the burden of knowing you're guaranteeing their deaths? Choices like these change the world of Dishonored drastically when stacked up. Depending on your chaos rating, the final level in particular has such a distinct feel, and it is directly the result of your agency. If very few games can execute what Hotline Miami does so well, even fewer can execute this well, and I think Dishonored stands out even among those. Every choice you make feels weighty because it can have a direct consequence on the world itself, not just your playing experience. Perhaps choosing to kill that guard sends the city over the edge into chaos. Or maybe the non-lethal option for a target is objectively more cruel than simply ending their life. The game's morality system has come under light fire in the past for being too binary or punishing the player for having fun, but that's not the case at all. It's asking you to introspect and think deeply about the choices you make. If you plan poorly, you could ruin the city forever. Nothing is stopping you from killing everything in sight, but then you'd have to bear the burden of the repercussions. Power and agency are the driving forces behind so many games we love. Games can uniquely communicate those concepts in a language all their own. Because we get to directly interface with their worlds, our level of power and agency can drastically affect how we see them. Everything communicates these concepts differently. And because of that, we can get really interesting glimpses into not only the worlds we love, but ourselves. Who are we when our choices can affect the fate of the world? Who do we become when no one can stop us? Can we be trusted to do the right thing? Only video games are really able to ask us those questions. It's a medium that thrives on players looking in the mirror and determining who they want to be. So ask yourself, when you hold everything in the palm of your hand, who are you? If you made it all the way to the end, first of all, thank you for giving me your time. I really, really appreciate it. You guys rock. This is kind of my first attempt at this thing, so if you liked it, let me know in the comments, and it would really mean a lot to me if you would share this with some of your other friends who might enjoy it. So once again, thank you for watching. Hopefully you'll be back for more. God bless, and remember, Jesus loves you.